All right, well, venue change, because, well, the van over there, it now has an alignment that keeps it driving straight, so I don't have to fight the thing from lane to lane forever, but the wheel bearing obviously is still trashed, so it's not going on this trip. However, we are now making the trip to go do the 2-barrel swap at James's house, so I will see you guys here in a couple hours. All right, well, we have made it into the garage. I'm sure you guys have seen this on the Chevette owners page. This one is mostly stock, which is great because this will let me show you all of the things that need to be done. You're going to need yourself a Phillips head screwdriver, and you're going to need yourself a 13mm socket, possibly a 13mm wrench, definitely an extension and a ratchet. 1/4-inch drive stuff is best. That way you can get down and around to get the bolts loose. Now, in this particular car's case, it has air conditioning, so there is a need to have the idle kick-up adapted to the new carburetor. However, it is not always a requirement depending on how it runs. Sometimes you can put the new Weber on here, tune it for the car, and then it's fine. What they did was, with all of the smog equipment on these and the load on the AC compressor, and the way these were tuned from the factory, is they would tend to idle down quite low when the power steering pump was activated or the AC compressor was activated. Most of the Weber swapped cars don't idle that low. They have a little bit more fuel at idle, so being a little richer, they don't necessarily idle that low. We'll get into that as we're going. There are a few things that need to be changed to make it compatible with this car, especially if you have an automatic like this one has. We'll go over here and take a look at the carburetors. I've got one of the OE carburetors right here, and I've got one of the replacement carburetors. This is the one that's going on the car now. When you get one of these Webers, most of the time you're going to get just this. You're going to get a paper gasket, real thin paper gasket, throw that in the trash. And then of course you're going to get a universal mechanical choke setup, and you'll probably also come up with the electronic one on the carburetor. If you get a DFEV, you're getting one with the electronic choke. Now, as far as adapting these to the car, there's a few things you're going to notice that are different right off the rip. One is the fuel inlet is not a threaded fuel inlet. It's a barb for 5/16 hose. If you wanted to keep the car where you could put it back to original, I'll show you how to do that by utilizing the factory fuel line, which is what we're going to do, and we're going to adapt it to fit this. The fuel filter on this, there is no need for an inline fuel filter in addition to this because these have a filter in them. This big brass deal right here comes off, and there is a cleanable screen in here. Most of the time it's just a cleanable screen. There is actually no filter to replace. You pull it out, you clean it, you put it back. Unlike the factory one that would have been inside of here. So it's just a little bit different type of filter. Generally, a screen in here is fine for a carburetor. This is a little bit more fine than just a screen in here, and it does the job fine. One other thing that you're going to notice is you're probably going to get a bunch of this stuff with it. If you have a manual transmission car, you only need this, and then you need a stud to go into one of these holes that adapts to the throttle cable. You can get those at most of your parts stores in the performance aisle, or the faux performance aisle, I like to call. Or sometimes you can find, if it's been a replacement carburetor, these come off, in which case you can transfer it over to this. But they're only a few bucks to go get one that works with the cable. And then you'll take the nut loose here. You'll put this on in place of this piece, and it gives you this little adapter to go in behind it that lets it run this lever for the choke. If you have an automatic car like this one, we're going to take the original carburetor, and you notice this entire arm here has the hole for the choke linkage and everything here for the Chevette already made. The geometry is perfect for the Chevette, and because these are the same carburetor, the shaft is the same. The difference is the factory one was not made to come apart. So what we have to do is we have to grind the face of this off to open up that oval hole and pull that off. We're also going to make a trim across here because this arm does not need to be there, because this little piece here is only for the idle screw, which has been moved down here on the Weber. And what we're going to end up doing here is, once this is open and this is cut off, this will fit right in place of this or this, and then it lets this entire thing go on here. You don't have to adapt anything. Your factory cable brackets will work, your factory cables will line up, and everything will operate like it's proper. So I'm going to get in here and I'm going to start tearing this apart. I'm going to get this carburetor off of here, and then once we get to the point where I'm starting to modify things on the lever, I'll go over exactly how we do that again. One other thing that gets transferred over, you notice, these do not have your traditional air horn rubber like the Chevette one does. It's just a matter of unscrewing it, pulling it off, transferring it over here. Although these screws are a different thread pitch, so you have to change the screws to fit this carburetor. Otherwise, this goes right on it, and then it allows your 2-barrel air filter housing to fit right on this. So I'm going to get started on removing this carburetor here. That way we can get to the nitty-gritty of how this is going to happen. Now, if you're going from a 2-barrel to a 2-barrel, for the most part, you pull this carburetor off, and once the Weber is modified for the car, it goes right on here, and you hook a few things up and you're done. If you are going from a 1-barrel to a 2-barrel, you're going to need an entire intake manifold for a 2-barrel. And you're going to need to remove, after you drain your coolant, you're going to need to remove all of these bolts across the bottom and across the top, and remove your 1-barrel intake manifold. If you have an automatic car and you get an intake manifold like this one that does not have the vacuum port for your automatic transmission, you will need to locate one. It looks like this. It doesn't have to be the factory one, but it has to be something that will let the automatic transmission line fit down inside of the fitting, and then the rubber goes over it. They just come out and screw right in. Now, these square plugs are usually put in with heat, so they tend not to come out very easily. Although I do find the ones that are for vacuum tend to come out easier than the ones that are for water. One other thing, if you are going from 1-barrel to 2-barrel, or from 2-barrel to 2-barrel, and you don't feel like drilling and modifying the carburetor, you're going to want to get a fitting here for your PCV valve as well. This is typically, you see these are both off of a car that had power brakes. If you don't have power brakes, this will be a plug like this. You'll pull out, put a fitting in it, and your 5/16 rubber line will go right over this, run up here, and run up to your PCV valve. Because unlike the factory carburetor that has a fitting in it down there, the aftermarket carburetor has very little vacuum ports. All of the bosses are here for them. If you'll notice, right here is your PCV port. I'll turn this one over so you can see it's the exact same. The difference is that hole's not drilled. Now, the difference between this carburetor and this carburetor, as far as how easily they are to drill, is night and day. These are just aluminum. These drill extremely easy. So if you wanted to take the time to run a drill bit through here and then transfer that into this carburetor, you don't even have to move the PCV valve. You just shove the pipe in here and it does the job. Same thing with any of these fittings. The stuff is here. Like this one's blocked off, and then this one's undrilled. So if you wanted to take the time to run the drill bit through to make the vacuum ports work, yeah, you can almost make these emissions compliant if you needed to keep all the vacuum accessories. And I'm going to be doing that at a later date with one of these to show how this just becomes a body donor for those that need to pass emissions I'll be able to show exactly how to put the vacuum accessories into this carburetor. You'll also notice things like this here. The boss is there, but the hole's not drilled. So the factory carburetors are set up for things like that vacuum RPM switch. If you wanted to, you could drill and tap this hole and you could add it to this particular carburetor. One other thing you'll notice that's a little bit different as you're looking between these two carburetors is the factory idle circuits are closed off. They are tuned from the factory. You don't change those jets in these. However, the aftermarket is tunable. You can change the idle circuit jets in these. And there's one on either side. There's the one for the primary side and that's the one for the secondary side. Oftentimes, when you get these carburetors out of the box, they'll have one that's too large on this side. So we're going to be checking that. And if that's the case, we're going to move it over to the secondary side and we're going to move the secondary to the primary side. And that lets them idle without being too rich. Aside from that, they're jetted pretty close out of the box. There shouldn't be any need to change anything internally on this. One other thing it does lack up here for emission stuff is the bowl vent. These do not have a bowl vent. They only vent up through here. This isn't required to run, but it is if you want an emissions compliant car. And this is one thing that would be a little bit weird because this has an electronic bowl vent and adapting this would just leave it an open bowl vent. So that's something that would have to be worked out with like an external solenoid to make it 100%, but it can be done. As far as removing the carburetor, if you're not keeping any of the vacuum stuff, like we're not going to be doing in this one, it's just easy to pull it all off of here. You really only need EGR valve, PCV, and you need the vacuum to the distributor advance. And if you have an air-conditioned car, regardless of whether your air conditioning works or not, if you have an air-conditioned car, you have got to have vacuum going to this ball and from the ball into the car to run the blend doors, because the cars that had a full HVAC system had vacuum operated blend doors and temperature doors rather than cable for everything. And again, automatic transmission. The rest of this is for the smog equipment, the purge valve. If you have an 82 up car, you'll also have a lockup torque converter, which will also need vacuum. So we're going to go over all the vacuum routing when I'm done here. We're going to clean all this up. I'm about to pull this carburetor off right now. Alright, now that you're down this far, you're going to notice that if you have the factory gasket underneath your carburetor, you're going to have this heater grid deal right here. Now these things were notorious for issues. And you notice this one here wasn't working, it was starting to clog up. When the heater grid starts to go cold, the carbon builds up and it chokes off the whole primary side of the intake manifold. This one's not bad, but you can also see where it's going to start coming apart too. It's gotten hot and it started to pit. This ceramic material actually just falls into the engine and then the engine inhales it. So what you're going to do when you're doing these is you're going to get yourself this Velcro gasket right here, 6259. It's a thick gasket and it takes the place of this heater grid. It also takes up the space on the studs that you're going to lose if you were to just use this. This does a couple things. It also insulates the carburetor as well as sealing the bottom of it. What you do have to remember though is when you tighten these down, you're going to tighten the carburetor into it and it's going to imprint into the surface, much like this heater grid did to the bottom of the carburetor. The thing is though, it takes a couple heat cycles to get that to happen. So once you do this install, after a couple drives, couple heat cycles, retighten the base nuts on the carburetor. You don't have to go Gorilla Tight. There's plastic spacers in here to stop you from going too far, but you also don't want to go Gorilla Tight because you don't want to warp the bottom of these carburetors. And as soon as you go too tight, you start squeezing across where these throttle shafts are at and it warps it, kind of makes it a cup, and then it puts pressure on these and it wears them out and then they leak vacuum everywhere. So run them down snug, give it a heat cycle, re-snug them. Sometimes I'll do it a third time. But you definitely throw this heater grid in the trash. They don't even make them anymore. This was only active for maybe 45 seconds to a minute when the car was below, I think, 30 degrees. But they do occasionally have problems where the electrical sensor that runs them right here shorts out and causes them to be on all the time. And that's when you end up with problems. Or that sensor goes bad and they just don't work at all and they clog up. So there is no service parts for these anymore, and it didn't keep emissions on the tailpipe lower. So this isn't something that would cause you to fail an emissions test if it's missing. It's just a component that is not really relevant anymore. And it didn't really do its job very well when it was in here. So you will simply just unplug it and throw it in the trash. You can see this one's already been unplugged for a while. So here's what we've ended up with. I have the linkage arm from this cut off because I just need the face. As you can see, it's just the face. And then this piece right here, that adapter that comes with it, goes on the front. I have to clearance right here just a little bit. Again, this is only for automatic cars. Manual cars can get away with using the existing setup with the proper pin in it for the cable. So I'm going to finish getting this tightened up and ready, and I'm getting ready to put it on the car. Now, one thing I did before I jump off of here and go to the next part, one thing you do have to do, because they swedge that onto that, it will be a little tight and it won't fit over the shaft. You will have to take something like this and just open up the hole ever so slightly all the way around to get the burrs off of it so it'll slide on, but then it's good to go. So now we have all of the wiring harness that goes to the ECU pulled out and laying over here. This is another reason why we were doing away with this, because a lot of it was just in bad shape. There's not going to be any making that work again. So some cars have this. Pre-1980 cars will not have this harness. You will not have to worry about that. This is only for 1980 up North American cars and non-Canadian cars. Only the US cars. Canadian cars stayed like this pretty much through all the way till 87. They didn't have the emissions equipment that the US cars had. So less to deal with there. Also less to deal with on the early cars because they didn't have it as well. If you don't use the factory Chevette choke coil on your Weber, just cut the end off, crimp one of these female spades on there, send it right up on there. Your fuel line, I always like to leave the nut on here because I never know when somebody's going to come back and want to put a stock carb back on these. So it's just as simple as running the line between here and here and running the two clamps. That's just as solid as having the threaded fitting, and then there's nothing else that you have to worry about. You don't change the line, you just adapt to it. PCV valve into that fitting, because we didn't drill this carburetor for anything. It comes out of that fitting and runs over here right to the PCV valve. And then, of course, everything over here for the linkage now functions, other than this has to be adjusted now for the transmission kickdown. And I've got to get a throttle return spring on this yet. So just a couple more things to go here and we should be firing it up. Note when you're tightening these down, you can get to 3 of these with the ratchet and the extension. This one down here, you're going to want a wrench, and you're going to want a box end wrench, something that's just a standard box end wrench that'll fit on there, because you only get about this much turn, and you only have enough room to get a box end wrench on that. There's no room to get a ratchet wrench around it. So yeah, it's definitely put the wrench on it, turn, lift, put the wrench back on it, turn until it's tight. Like that, we are all back together. I have the adapter from the old carburetor on the new carburetor with the 2 screws that actually fit this carburetor. We didn't determine if these were metric or not. I didn't check the threads. We just found a couple that fit it. I will verify what those threads are on this when I get back to the house. But at this point, it is full fuel. It has already started. It was pretty simple. It just cranked over until it filled up full of fuel, and then it fired right up. Oh, where's the keys?
I don't know.
Did I put them in my pocket?
Oh, in the trunk.
Oh, they're in the trunk. Just like that. Now, when I start these carburetors, when I adjust them initially, the idle speed screw is run in till it just touches the arm, and as soon as the arm moves, you give it 1/2 turn and another 1/2 turn. They should only be open 1 full turn. I'll show you here in a second when I shut the car back on. The other thing is the curb idle mixture screw. You want to start with that about 2 turns out. And what I mean by that, I got the screwdriver here, is when you adjust these, you run this and get it in focus here. Jesus, it doesn't want to focus at all. Focus. Okay, there we go. Now when you adjust these, you're going to run them in all the way. Jeez, okay. Until it stops. You don't want to force it past its stop. It's just going to go closed. So right where it stops. And then you're going to count. 1/2, 1. 1/2, 2. That's your baseline. Now we're going to adjust it from here, but that's enough to get you running. Same thing with the idle speed screw down here. When you run the screw in, you want it to just touch this arm, and this arm will just start to move. And once it just starts to move open, you count your turns. 1/2, 1, 1/2, 2. Or, well, no, that's for this. You count your turns. 1/2, 1 on your idle speed screw. Idle speed screw is only 1 turn in. You actually may even back it off about 1/4 of a turn once it's all adjusted to get the right speed. But as long as everything is close, for the most part, this thing is going to need a little bit of an adjustment, and then you are done. Real quick, I got back home and realized that while I was doing this video, I totally didn't go over the vacuum diagram at all. Oops. It is very simple though, because most of these cars are only going to need the distributor. The only ones that need anything more than that are automatic cars, late model automatic cars with lockup torque converters, and any of them with air conditioning because they need full vacuum. So, if we were looking at this car as if it was the one I was working on that had that big vacuum ball, okay, that needs full vacuum. That needs to go into this intake manifold. Probably this T. A lot of these intake manifolds will have 4. Some of them have 2, but most of these late model ones will have 4. You'll probably end up with one that you don't use, you just cap it. I like to run this larger one right here, should be the one that goes over to that vacuum ball that sat here. And then from the vacuum ball into the car, that's in the harness. So as long as that vacuum line's there, it's good. Your distributor will go up to one of these smaller ones on the top. And then if you have the lockup torque converter solenoid that sits right here, you're going to run that vacuum line to the other one. And then that's it. Now, as far as 1-barrel carburetors go, and the fuel line from the fuel pump to the carburetor, it is completely different than the 2-barrel. in its length and its shape, it's honestly best to just take your 5/16 rubber hose, fuel rated hose. Has to be fuel rated hose. From the pump directly up to the new carburetor. Just make sure it's not touching anything hot. If you want, you can bend yourself a new hard line to take up the distance, and then just use the little bit of rubber on the ends. Aside from that, that's really the only difference between the 1 barrel and the 2 barrel. Most of your 1 barrel cars, if they had an automatic, they're obviously going to be plumbed similar. That automatic fitting will be there, but they won't have a lockup torque converter, so you won't have to worry about that. So it's basically distributor on the pre-79 cars. I think that's about it. As far as any other questions, you guys can email me if you really need to, or you can get a hold of me on Facebook Messenger. So I guess with that, I'm going to call it an evening. All right, well, there we have it. We took it on a road trip, and it's flawless. Other than it's got a couple little transmission issues, but that's neither here nor there because it doesn't have anything to do with the carburetor. So in the meantime, you guys take it easy. I'm going to head back to Columbus. I'm going to let James here get back to his stuff. And hopefully the next time you guys see this car, it'll probably have the giant Hot Wheels sticker down the side of it. And we'll have a little bit more report on how it does. So in the meantime, you guys keep the shiny side up.